What is going on YouTube? Today I am firing up my take on the grand strategy game Europa Universalis 4, and I'm going to teach you how to win as a Marquise of the Colonies, Theodoro. Before we go any further, I want you to like and subscribe as we set sail on this early modern odyssey. Have you ever asked yourself, what if the Byzantines survived the Ottoman conquest? What if a Greco-Gothic appanage of Trebizond could do it? It could, and we will. Why? Eastern Romans have had a slow-burning 800-year run of bad luck. Trebizond and Constantinople's necks are at the throats of the Ottomans, the Beyliks, and the Karakoyunlu. The perithalastic polis of Theodoro, once a Greek colony for shipping Pontic grain and subject to the Bosporan Basileus, was subject to Rome, and then the Goths, incorporated into Byzantium and settled by Cumans, Alans, Greeks, Bulgars, Armenians, and Khazars. It was also in the shadow of the Huns, Crimean Tatars, the Golden Horde, and the Genoese. Yet the Crimean Gothic language is attested to even the 18th century, and a population of Goths certainly still existed by 1444. 4 hordes and 1 sultan are lining up for a piece of the Paratea pie. It's pottery when France, England, Spain, Portugal, the Ottomans, Austria, or Russia build an empire. When an OPM changes history, it's poetry. We're going to take the living fossil that is Gothic culture and the unique Byzantine Cuman fusion and pull it out of the fire. So I call my 15th century strategy the Latin mitre over the Turkish turban, better yet known throughout the EU4 community as an OCB East Frisia strategy. You begin on November 11, 1444, and send a diplomat to raise relations with Lithuania, send one to ally Trebizond, and send another to raise relations with Brandenburg. You minimize troop maintenance and naval maintenance. Grant the clergy estate privileges of religious state, which gives +1 admin points per month. Religious diplomats, which grants +25 relations with neighboring countries of the same religion. Oversight by the clergy and clerical advisors drop your maximum absolutism and raise the clergy influence, but also raise the loyalty equilibrium of the clergy. This is not strictly necessary right now, but having a loyalty equilibrium of at least 50% allows you to seize land periodically, thus increasing your crownland and reducing estate influence. In the long term, this will raise maximum absolutism and an important derived attribute called administrative efficiency. Maximum absolutism and administrative efficiency do not matter, but will be practical for a conquest from 1600 onwards. Therefore, it's a good practice to remove privileges in the 1580s to get the maximum absolutism when the calendar hits 1600. During the 1500s, a New World missions privilege is also helpful if you take a colonial strategy, so take it when you acquire a New World colony. For the burgher estate, if you can reduce the clergy influence to 0, you will want to choose enforce interfaith dialogue to minimize religious unrest. This will drop clergy loyalty equilibrium by 10, but there are circumstances in which they have no influence and cannot revolt. You also want indebted to the burghers privilege, which gives you 5 loans at 1% interest. The interest rate is so reasonable that you can pay it off via the gold earned in wars, combined with peacetime austerity. If you automatically acquire bank loans because you run out of money and have a money deficit, you could take these loans to consolidate debt with more reasonable interest sums. Like with the clergy, if the burghers lose their influence, you can revoke and grant the privilege again to 5 new loans. Revoking the privilege does not get rid of the original loans, however. The privilege will be necessary to fund your forces in the First War. You should build the force limit and then go over force limit by 2. You will have 9 or even 10 regiments, and these 7 or 8 infantry and 2 cavalry. Supporting the maintenance when over force limit will slowly run you a deficit even if you minimize it. While the free company and mercs are generally greatly useful, you have to consider the principal costs and the fact that you cannot reduce their fees per month. Now grant the patronage of the arts privilege for additional prestige, which gives a number of diplomatic benefits. Land of commerce is useful, but diplomatic monarch points are the least critical of the 3. Admin points are vital for coring and reducing overextension, while military points are necessary for military tech, which is a main deciding factor in a battle. Take this later into consideration once you have recuperated your crownland. If the burghers have influence, consider free enterprise to raise their loyalty equilibrium. In my game, I had a disaster appear called the nobility coup, which overthrew the other 2 estates' influence. This means I could grant and revoke to them as I please with no concern over revolts. It also meant I only had to worry about noble revolters. It appeared due to low crownland and high nobility influence. If you want to colonize, choose Grant New World Charters privilege for the increased settler chance. For the nobility, you want primacy of the nobility for +1 monthly military monarch points. Another privilege I like is command of the military, which gives +1 yearly army tradition. However, hiring generals or admirals costs 20% more, and the noble state gains 5 influence for 10 years each time you hire generals, admirals, and their colonial counterparts. The privilege initially grants them an additional 30 influence. It's a Faustian bargain, especially with the noble coup, but I believe having the competitive edge of army tradition is worth it. Finally, to improve the equilibrium, choose a noble council privilege. Our next stage, joining the HRE, I call the Roman transfer orbit. With all these privileges set, you want to choose an agenda, something easy like raise base production or grow manpower. Send your cog transports into the western Black Sea adjacent to Lithuania and the Crimean Khanate. So now you're ready. You got your QT Komnena Trapezuntine GF. You mouse over to East Frisia so you may no see be them. It's December 11th, 1444. Bam! They day 1 allied Denmark and you are screwed. Go back to the main menu and start all that over again. You may want to have them only ally Friesland or some literal who like Munster. If you wish, you might want to spend time configuring the estate privileges until after this tiny alliance is a guarantee, to the exclusion of powerful guarantors of East Frisia like Denmark. Another potential issue is if the event fires for them to join the HRE. Same scenario, you have to reload. When the clock hits December 11th, declare on East Frisia and Friesland. Now they cannot ally anyone else during the war. When you have declared war, only then use the cogs to transport units to Lithuania, not before. Units which are in foreign territory when a war starts count as exiled and cannot see or engage enemies. So now do you think you're ready to march halfway across Eurasia and reach these Frisian counties? If you answered yes, well then you'd be wrong. Sure, you have these 9 regiments funneling through a boat to circumvent Crimeans blocking your path, but they may also try to invade you early as March 1445. This is another cause for reset. Whether it's the initial 4 units or a built-up stack, it's unlikely you're going to take on the Crimeans. The best bet would be to remain in the capital province, aka the Paratea, Mengup or Theodoro, whatever you want to call it, where they don't have the steep shock bonus, and get great pips from your leader. You have little to lose right now, so you might as well assign the ruler as a general. If you can defeat the whole Crimean stack and occupy and take their lands, great. You have 2 options though. The first is hope you can defeat and vassalize East Frisia, then annex an adjacent province, integrate East Frisia 10 years later, and move the capital there all before they join the HRE, then petition the emperor to join it. It's possible, but unlikely an Iron Man to get so lucky as to have this consecutive chain of events all occur in your favor. The second is to forsake an English Channel HRE strategy. You can hack it out in the Caucasus, Caspian, and Steppe, especially when allying amenable hordes like the Great Horde, and then Muscovy and Lithuania. But if you can make it in as steep as Theodoro, you didn't need my guide anyway. You could probably make it as Manpower versus Jan Mayen, DBH. So you ask, why does it work like this? Because to join the HRE, you need to have a capital adjacent to an HRE province that is contiguous with the rest of the HRE. For Theodoro, that's East Frisia if you vassalize it, defend it in a war with Oldenburg and its ally Lubeck, then improve relations, drop Liberty Desire, and integrate it after 10 years. Then you have to use your admin points to change to East Frisia as a capital. You cannot change your capital to an HRE province if you aren't in the HRE. And you cannot change it from an HRE province to non-HRE if you are in the HRE. In the latter case, you have to choose to leave the HRE. Since it's likely East Frisia will join in that time period, you may conquer Oldenburg, and the only way to join the HRE, bypassing the Emperor's opinion of you, is to lose your capital in the Crimean Peninsula. You can do that by antagonizing Crimea. They demanded I also release East Frisia, which mattered little to me since my main goal was to access the stable part of northwestern Europe and the HRE protection from outsiders. I may be getting ahead of myself, but as stated, I inherited a defensive war with Oldenburg on behalf of East Frisia, defeated Oldenburg and Lubeck, and this allowed me to annex Oldenburg in the peace deal without a coalition forming from an aggressive expansion. To summarize, if you're lucky to keep your original capital province, then move your capital to a non-HRE East Frisia and join the HRE through Austria's favor. You get the benefit of the HRE, Burgundian inheritance chance, colonization opportunities, and the traditional Caucasus expansion either through Circassia or Imereti. It is unlikely the hordes would attack since they would have to face the emperor as a co-belligerent, and you have +1 diplo rep. This is great because when you're stuck in the English Channel region, your options for expansion while you wait for colonization are limited to no sea being Ireland. Granada is probably Spanish clay by the time you settle East Frisia and Oldenburg and join the HRE. If you keep Theodoro and move the capital to East Frisia, you could be an HRE prince, inherit Burgundy, take some Irish duchies, colonize, and conquer the Caucasus and northwestern Persia. This is the perfect 15th century as I see it for Theodoro, Moldavia, Imereti, Tremezond, or Circassia, Black Sea miners. The running theme of this playthrough and all EU4 playthroughs is separatism and endless rebels all day, every day. Rebels that constantly field dozens of regiments and drain your manpower. So be prepared with your stack to sail on Mediterranean transports, or try and use the military access that you had with Brandenburg, Brunswick, Poland, and Lithuania. It's worth noting that when you initially declare on East Frisia, it helps to improve relations to get access with these 4 countries, but usually it just takes Lithuania and Brandenburg. Poland and all the Western German princedoms seem to give conditional access either to your enemies, which it also gives to you, or they effortlessly give you access when you ask because they hate East Frisia. When you start as Theodoro and try to play Iron Man, you're used to day 1 invasions and reset-inducing mishaps. That when things go right, you are shocked and you don't press your luck. I made this an Iron Man file, but for honesty, I did reload separate saves when my position would implode, which happened quite often. That said, the capture of East Frisia and joining the Empire is reasonably attainable without save scumming. The conquest of Irish provinces is replicable and the very antithesis to a long shot. Burgundian inheritance is somewhat replicable, so hemorrhaging from loans and uncertain of what other princes might have done to me, I had kept my head low from trouble during the rest of the 15th century, focused on good manners, teching up, and rebel converting to Catholicism. Aggressive expansion cautioned me against too much action in the HRE, and I had a meager economy from ceding an already useless Crimean capital to Crimean Tatars. As such, I didn't have a financial base to support a rebel-crushing army to send between Ireland and Frisia. So part of this playthrough is figuring out what's reasonably possible in Iron Man so that with better skill in the future, I would have strategies that minimize RNG. You cannot build an Iron Man strategy with Austria, for example, that somehow counts on Ladislas Postumus PUing Hungary, Poland not choosing a Jagiellon, vassal Byzantium collapsing the Ottomans, or getting a personal union yourself over the superpowers of Navarra and Karabakh all in the same Iron Man campaign. Unrest, namely quantity, admin, humanist, offensive, etc. The initial ideas I chose during this campaign did not help me achieve world conquest, but were quite helpful for exponentially magnifying the size and power of my weak OPM. They also seem to be the most practical given the position I was in with the HRE unlawful territory malice, aggressive expansion, and separatism headaches. I chose exploration and expansion as my first idea groups. Portugal and Castile had the best situation for colonizing. England soon follows the Iberians in colonization. France laps up the sloppy seconds, while Brittany can take what they get. In my playthrough, Theodoro essentially takes a niche of the Netherlands while straddling the former Burgundian domains of Alsace-Lorraine and the fringes of Switzerland. Like historical Spain and France, I struggle to balance colonial ambitions and the early modern pike and shot trench warfare in a hotly contested Europe. But I had ambition for my own sprawling colonial empire and would weather bankruptcy. With the power of save scumming, grit, duct tape, and boldly sacrificial gambits, I was also barely able to hold my domains together against the onslaught of separatists sensing weakness. Let's discuss colonization first. Colonization minimally requires Admin Tech 5, choosing exploration ideas, and then 400 diplomatic monarch points for the quest for the New World idea to hire explorers and conquistadors. You need another 400 diplo for the second idea in the exploration group, granting you a colonist. The window to start colonies is typically 1490 to 1515, depending on the location of your country. Colonial range is a hard threshold of distance, and your range must be greater than or equal to the distance between a maritime core, province of your country, and the target province to colonize. Put simply, Castile and Portugal can just colonize Arguin or Cape Verde to leapfrog to the eastern tip of Brazil, soon after getting a colonist. The rest of us have to wait about 5 years to get the third idea for colonial range, then tech up to diplomatic skills 7 or 9 for more range. Those techs also draw diplomatic monarch points, as well as the exploration ideas, so we colonizers have a great crunch on diplomat points. In my case, the colonization started on the later end and was a matter of bridging the colonial range gap between Zeeland and a coastal desert province called Arguin. The Iberians don't target this province often, but if they did, the New World colonization game would have been forfeit for me. From there, I could reach Trinidad. Trinidad, in turn, enabled me to colonize any part of the Caribbean, eastern Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, Panama, and eastern North America. My goal was to colonize a minimum 5 provinces in the Caribbean to form a colonial nation. They are self-managing, and I found the AI colonial nations in other countries don't try to conquer them. They transfer trade, power upstream via merchant, and my provinces are in perhaps the most valuable end node in the whole game. Unlike normal vassals, they do not take up a diplomatic relations slot. They provide tariff revenue. They would build armies and navies to help me in war. And when they acquire trend provinces, they contribute to my land and naval force limit, as well as providing a merchant. Of course, many colonizable provinces and colonial regions have poor development. The highest colonial development you can have is in the Moluccas at 11, while many provinces only have a minimum 3 development. As soon as you have 5 provinces in a colonial region, you get the colonial nation, and they use their own income to fund colonists. You continue to help grow these colonial nations, but the best move is to immediately start colonizing in another colonial region, form a colonial nation. Specifically, to take all the trade estuaries and trade centers that contribute more trade, power to a given country in a node. Most trade funnels downstream into the Caribbean node, which makes it the most critical to colonize. Secondarily, eastern North America is very important, and third, the Isthmus of Panama. Trade then goes through the African Ivory Coast to Sevilla, where Iberians and Tyrrhenian states take their cut, up to Bordeaux, and finally the English Channel. It also reaches the English Channel from the Gulf of St. Lawrence in Canada through the North Sea. I prefer to form colonial nations in every possible region. To this end, I succeeded, except in Peru, Mexico, Cascadia, and Louisiana. Louisiana was particularly an ego blow since a portion of the Portuguese pulled off was a massive and productive part of the American heartland in the Midwest, Great Plains, Texas, and the South. Spain, in no one's surprise, got almost all of Mexico, but made the real-world Spanish Getica in what we call British Columbia and Alaska a thing. I met an impasse with them in Brazil. Portugal also copped Australia, while Spanish Alaska spilled over the date line into Chukotka. The TLDR on this is that I'm mad I didn't just steal everything from everyone. Probably would have been just easy to block off Portugal and Louisiana, but I didn't have their cush start and benefit of zero continental problems. All in all, early colonization was highly focused on function, while late-game colonization was because I had the extra 6 gold a month to spend, and I wanted a great empire on paper. When I got the best I could out of the Americas, and cumulatively there would be some benefit to all these territorial cores that average 5 dev each, but not as much as if I ruthlessly conquered India, China, and the Middle East throughout the game. I used the colonies in Africa to go around the Cape of Good Hope and make a large territory in Mozambique. I then took some land from Zimbabwe and Kilwa in a war. Being spread thin and falling behind in tech, I however did not conquer that country of Warsangali in the Horn of Africa. The wasteland north of the Congo prevented me from reaching the Sahel from here. Africa was devoid of good allies, so I settled to be content with dominating the southeast. This region gave me the colonial range to take colonies in the Strait of Malacca in what is now Indonesia. Only a few contributed there, so the trade power wasn't great, but the general benefit of development towards income, manpower, and force limit is unmistakable. I also extended my global military reach for transport ships and in turn armies. I could thus distribute units between the Western European and East Asian theaters in about 6 months, a level of mobilization none of the AI practice, including maritime colonial powers. This brings me to a great point about the benefit of colonizing. If in one region you are outmatched and stuck, you can colonize and get a CB on numerous countries falling behind in tech or development. Then you can cobble an empire out of them and use these newfound states to take on your old enemies. This principle applies the same when playing an African or Native American colony. You have to unite the other polities in your region by military force to form a state which parries the colonizers, the empires, and the hordes. If I simply stayed in Crimea, I would have to topple the Crimean Khanate, conquer the Caucasus while allying a regional power. Campaigns for the Three Mountains achievement with Ryukyu count on exploration ideas in this fashion so you can make claims on neighboring provinces. As a restatement, being part of the HRE means that any outside country which starts a war with me must also fight Austria. This does not protect me from HRE princes that could CB and call in Austria as their own ally, and especially when the target of a war declaration is my ally but not an HRE prince. I had another attempt with Theodoro in which I couldn't reintegrate East Frisia or annex Oldenburg, so I was left with Irish OPMs. The British chased me out of Ireland, so I had to rebuild from St. Lucia in the Caribbean. Not being an HRA prince, I rebuilt colonies, and since my capital was in the Americas, they did not form colonial nations. Thus, I could conquer European colonial nations and manage the separatists. But with no deterring alliance, France decided to start a massive war with me to conquer this Caribbean kingdom. The Civil War disaster did not help. I did manage to repel them with guerrilla warfare in Honduras and cut down the armies doing a shattered retreat. I managed to do targeted jumps from island to island and sneak around their superior fleets with transport ships. They still managed to occupy other islands, make me pay 800 gold, and cede some territories. I proceeded to cope, seethe, and rage quit. The point is, being able to secure alliances and benefit from HRE protection respectively help your offensive and defensive game. Getting back to colonization, I leapt north in this game to have a colonial outpost in the Philippines give me the range to colonize Okhotsk in Siberia. I already owned Canada, giving Portuguese Louisiana a Tyrian purple 10-gallon hat, so it's only fair that China and the Tatari got a 20-gallon. I'm also the second Rome, so I figured I deserve everything east of the Urals before the third Rome would get it. Jokes aside, I secured great allies in the Wu and Dali Chinese kingdoms. The numbers advantage of my armies, mercs, and their token support helped me overcome the steppe horde terrain advantage, cutting down a Manchurian Khanate called Udige. In the peace deal, I negotiated a border with the northern Chinese dynasty known as Shun. Ultimately, some wars with Shun cut them down to size and enabled expansion in East Asia. The colonies I made enabled alliances with Wu and Dali. Western and Eastern allies sent for me, and through diplomatic soft power, I was too big to fail, despite ending the game with 60% inflation, 100 corruption, and 6 mil tax behind the meta. Long story short, I could walk troops from Okhotsk to Constantinople without boarding a ship or passing through foreign provinces. Here's the big argument to colonizing. Just be a land chad with 200k troops in 1700 and just roll right into Portugal, steamroll everything, 100% war score, occupy all the provinces. Do this 3 to 4 times and completely annex their country to inherit all the colonial subjects as your own. Do it to Spain, do it to England. You got someone else to do all the colonizing, basically. Didn't spend 2,000 diplo in admin, but the ideas you did buy also help you dominate Eurasia. If you're doing a world conquest and you're constantly pushing each resource to the limit, maybe this is possible and meta with Theodoro. I say big if, as the Alzabo HD run counts on multiple personal unions throughout Europe. Most using this strategy for world conquest are already France, Ottomans, Oirat, Mughals, or Russia. In my case, the Burgundian, Dutch, Luxembourger, German, Hainaut, and Swiss subjects were bully-siding me. Later on, my armies would be the Harlem Globetrotters, except instead of making half-court shots, they'd make 20,000 musket ball shots. Neither side was very happy. Sepsis and nights spent shoveling for both sides. Only my team would have to reinforce new men from levies, while my armadas lose half of their transport men to a diet of salted pork and scurvy. Imagine 40,000 men sailing all around the world and making drive-by shootings to local rebels almost constantly. It's like something out of Warhammer 40k. When things would stabilize and we recover our losses with new child soldiers, we can skate on thin ice to start a new war to overextend ourselves more. It's a traveling circus of killer clowns, and the joke is on everyone. Having to be many far-flung places at once makes it difficult to concentrate on one conquest, and sometimes suppressing a rebellion was race against time to occupy the province before it defected. There were times in which an ally or neutral party would cross through my territory and save me the trouble of fighting the rebels, or I'd become embroiled in a war in which enemies deposed rebels, or in Africa where the rebels would simply leave an unoccupied province. This made it easier to liberate that said province. Sometimes I'd start a war just to enable allies to unintentionally liberate my rebel-occupied lands. What does not help is the deep purple color of the Theodoro tag, which makes the black rebel stripes blend in. I lost land in Savoy this way to the Knights Hospitaliers, and Savoy wasted little time to take it. I lost land in Japan that way, but it didn't stick because I save-scummed. It's one thing to lose a war or lose provinces to separatists outright, but it's BS to not notice occupied provinces due to tag color. Fortunately, almost all the gained provinces in the game did not revert. As a Holy Roman Emperor, you can get useful reforms like a minor pfennig that give about 25 ducats a month in princely tax, revoke the privilegia which turns every princedom into a direct military vassal, and renovatio imperii, which makes all of these vassals integrate as your directly controlled provinces. Your tag switches to the Holy Roman Empire, and this last step is of minimal cost compared to conquering and coring or vassal feeding normally one vassals and then integrating. You can conquer then release a province as a vassal, and it will neither contribute to unrest nor governing capacity, but perhaps have liberty desire from the overlord. In effect, there's a way to make any old world country an HRA prince, or you can feed Tartarian land to the easternmost vassals. You can control some land and delegate the rest to vassals, then hit renovatio and conquer the world anyway. You accumulate a stat called imperial authority to eventually gain all these reforms. Today, though, the emperor card was read, but it wasn't in the hand I was dealt. When the Protestant Reformation begins, centers of Reformation randomly spawn throughout Western Europe and convert countries in their region. In the game files, the distance is set to 150. To give you an idea, this means that if a center spawns in Barcelona, it can touch Konstanz in southern Germany, Switzerland, and northwestern Italy. When princes become heretics from Catholicism, they provide a monthly imperial authority malus of 0.1, which quickly cuts all of your monthly gains. Centers can spawn in the HRE often, and within a few years of virtually no hope of converting all the 50 princedoms back to Catholicism, by edict or by armistice. You can force the OPMs to convert in war, and they lose the center of reform. You have to act quickly as a powerful emperor and no-CB these princedoms, but try to remain emperor while you manage a rise in aggressive expansion and bad relations with those countries, and also prevent the coalitions that can ensue. Austria is best suited with its long borders, but a Brandenburg emperor could do it as well. So you ask, what nearly broke you in the pivotal 15th century? I would say colonization costs and protecting the new colonies, the depletion of manpower, regiments, and money by the discontents of Alsace-Lorraine, the Transalpine Savoyards, and the Polder Belt. Most of all, a failed crusade to Catholicize the heretics. Just 8 princes refused to render unto Caesar, so no princely vassals from revoke the privilegia. To bypass these heretics, it would be best to revoke the privilege before 1500. With the DLC, there's a quick lambda imperial authority farming revoke involving trade companies. It's a big if whether Theodoro has a clout starting out to set up this trade company revoke by putting its capital in Kola for the Western European subcontinental and separating its capital from Eastern European subcontinental provinces via releasing a vassal. This is more common than with the Oirat Horde in World Conquest speedruns. Your starting development and position dictates how the 15th century will go, after all. There's a similar Bast revoke that has worked before, but Hungary is the best candidate. The Art of War DLC also leaves the option for League Wars and more variation on resolving the heretic imperial authority malice, but your tag's prominence in the HRE may come into play. For most players, DLC are not preventive violence against the centers of reformation as Austria matter to get the revoke. There are different methods in the Emperor DLC, with voluntary additions of the Empire or conquest to raise imperial authority, but the monthly tech alone to get to revoke usually takes 125 to 250 years. And even if you have a ton of imperial authority, it doesn't matter if you're gaining a lot quickly, because if you lose it, then you lose it. And the heretics will add up. As long as you have a monthly malice, all the imperial authority you're gaining is being lost. Needless to say, I tried to get the world conquest winning revoke on my side, and I reloaded many times on Iron Man saves to make it happen. This boiled down to loading the older save state, playing for 10 years in the game, then finding out that the center of Reformation spawned in Cologne or Eastern Germany. I would then reload to try to get a lucky scenario in which each center spawned close enough for me to attack, or far enough not to convert HRE princedoms. It's my fault for picking Iron Man, and sure, I can melt down saves non-Iron Man, but having the inconvenience of reloading this way made my decisions keen. Trying to own the Protestants and Calvinists probably quadrupled the hours in this playthrough, with little to show but insights. Either be Austria and be beloved as the headsman of the new Adamite Catamites, or do one trick that isn't Iron Man friendly. Theodoro inheriting Burgundy simply cannot afford all the bad blood of warmongering in the HRE to police 8 disparate princedoms, let alone 30. If it was viable, the revoke would not happen before game's end anyway. The non-Iron Man friendly trick is to save and reload whenever centers of Reformation spawn. If you're lucky that 3 spawn in Ireland, a couple in central Spain or Portugal, and maybe one right next to you, you have minimal heretic princes in the HRE and you will get that revoke. Nevertheless, despite the ill of acquiring unlawful territory to reduce heretics, I learned about using co-belligerent allies of the country I declared one to attract the allies of those co-belligerents. This was practical when I needed to force convert Mecklenburg and Hamburg. Put more simply, let's say I need to force one religion on a country with 2 separate countries between it and me. I fabricate claims on the adjacent country allied to the country behind it, but not my real target, which is blocked by those 2 countries. Since the adjacent country to me is allied to that country behind it, that country will most likely join the war. Then I declare it as a co-belligerent, and then it'll call in my real target if it is allied. This is not always an option, but I had to be creative with waging these oblique wars so that I wouldn't get no CB of the Reformation Center, and then Austria and its cronies would get involved. These tactics are everything when you are in the Reformation HRE, but it's sheer luck if you can extend the range of your CB this way. If Scilly is the center of reform, it'll be difficult for a player in northern or western HRE tags to get a CB. In such case, it is likely to be an Austrian ally anyway. A good fraction of northern Italy may also be HRE centers of reform, so it's even less probable to convert them. As far as Protestant princedoms go, you could conquer those that aren't center of reform to reduce the heretic malice. Finally, if Denmark, France, Poland, or Brandenburg get a center of reform on the HRE borders, fat chance that your rinky-dink Syndic Republic is going to make them say novenas. After you start doing major conquests, you can assemble allies and co-belligerent an ally of your war target to bring a 3rd tag into the mix. What you want to do is separately peace out after occupying them all, and take corable land from the ally that was declared co-belligerent, then take land from the ally that co-belligerent had brought in. Finally, take land from the original war target. If you sign peace with the original war target first, all other parties declare peace. Therefore, always use separate peace when conquering multiple countries. This also allows you to take more than 100% war score in land. When the peace out happens with the allies, the war score drops and you can kill, occupy, or wait to take it further. As many people say, wait for the ally to get war exhaustion and they'll give you the keys to the city. How well you can do this depends on coring range, which is only based on adjacent provinces inland to you or subjects to you. Consider the maritime provinces, especially with high diplomatic tech. You can't conquest claim them through building a spy network until imperial conquest, but you can take them in a peace deal if you declare it with an applicable CB elsewhere. Combining unrest and the unlawful territory malice, the biggest issue of this period of the campaign was becoming a pariah in the HRE for trying to save it from fracturing, and the fact that Gothic Burgundy was its own Fabergé egg. Liège, an archbishopric, separated my lands, so I could not get military access to stop the Swiss revolters from seceding to Switzerland. I built a CB against Liège, and then threw the whole Western HRE into war. I believe I got Great Britain and maybe the Commonwealth involved to dumpster all the HRE princes like Brandenburg. Everybody nearby in the HRE refused me military access before that war, as did France. This huge war crushed the Swiss insurrection, incorporated Liège, and netted some concessions to me from Brandenburg. When diplomacy fails to accomplish your goals, there is always war. I had gotten ahead of myself regarding colonization. The African, Moluccan, and Siberian colonization progressed through the latter half of the 1600s and residually till the end of the game, much after my Protestant Reformation wars and the crusading within the Holy Roman Empire. 16th century colonization was mainly difficult in repelling native attacks because in order to defend the colony, I needed full troop maintenance even in peacetime. This was economically prohibitive until my empire grew large enough that I could easily afford full maintenance. But by the later game, I found that with most native populations, you could keep minimum maintenance until an attack happens. Then the notification pauses time and you can raise maintenance. The game automatically gives enough of a morale that with your later game tech advantage, you could defeat the natives. In Africa, some native populations were strong such that I had to wait outside the vulnerable province, raise maintenance, wait for the next month tick, and then march in to defeat them. By contrast, Siberian natives would get attrition and lose a minimum regiment size of 1,000 troops, thus failing to damage a colony until I could address them. I don't know the mechanics that govern native combat ability, but I can check the game files and give you an update. I do believe the potential effect of technology disparity with natives is important, as it seems more costly to manpower when leading a Native American army through uncolonized provinces than it is for Europeans with advanced tech. On a similar note, I believe separatists inherit the military technology they want to secede to. For example, I dealt with an Ottoman rebel stack of 15k, which won against my 21k stack, and the Ottomans were ahead by 4 tacks. I believe this holds true for annexed nations, which still have cores on a given province. One bit of advice that I'd like to make is, again, never underestimate the power of getting your allies involved in a war that you want to fight to expand to deal with the previous rebels of provinces you captured in a previous war that are mounting, and there's many of them. There's high unrest. They're building in number because you could have like 36k rebels like I did in Constantinople, and these were Ottoman rebels, better tech than me, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth just occupied Constantinople and killed all of them. And the more provinces you take at once with greater development, then you have to deal with greater numbers of rebels that spawn like every 10 years from that particular separatist group. And it really stacks up with good amount of development, but also the base force limit from conquering many different nations, cultures, ethnic groups, what have you. I even had a case where I overextended through rapid conquest and unrest to take all the Levant in Egypt with the Ottomans, and I got the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth to fight 50k and then another 50k stack that came from separate rebels. So all in all, I got one of my allies to kill 100k that I never would have been able to afford to take care of myself. And as I later discussed in this video, the corruption malice does have one benefit to it. It's like a benign neglect. It's kind of like you bribe the local officials and it lowers unrest in a region. It's like you're federating your whole empire, and they have their own degree of autonomy with the corruption, and they grift off your taxes. And as such, you don't end up dealing with as much rebels forming. So you do fall behind in technology, and you do have a host of problems, increased costs for everything, but it gives you a really great buffer to deal with your unrest, so you don't have rebels everywhere. With the amount of conquests I've done, or the amount of provinces taken, and trying to balance out these rebels springing up, if I didn't have that whole barrier that lowered unrest, then I would be having not thousands, but perhaps hundreds of rebel stacks throughout the world, or at least hundreds of regiments of rebel stacks, and they'd win and the whole empire would fracture. So to reiterate, by the time I abandoned the feudal task of getting revoked the privilegia, I was saddled with the cost of rising corruption, which I attempted to reduce throughout the majority of the 1600s to no avail. This corruption stemmed from imbalanced tech and unlawful territory. The world conquest of no non-subjects remaining, and especially one tag, was lost to me. Lost due to the military tech lag from corruption and the reduced administrative efficiency because of the noble disaster lowering my absolutism cap. There was also time lost turtling in the 17th century when I could have made use of admin efficiency for CCR, stabilizing my country before starting major conquests. Finally, lost because of the time wasted turtling in the 15th century, resources sunk into colonization, and wasted on trying to unite the HRE by counter-reformation. It would take relentless ardent conquest and possibly DLC-based text to bathe the whole map in Tyrian purple. Yet I could still conquer and core many of the countries that now comprise today's major powers. Half of Japan, northern China and Canton, all of Siberia east of the Urals, Mongolia, Manchuria, and the Ural, Xinjiang, the fringes of the Tibetan Plateau, a sway through Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, Iran, the Strait of Hormuz, Iraq, East Africa, Anatolia, Sevastopol, Greece, coastal India, the Moluccas, Egypt, Levant, the Low Countries, Eastern North America, California, Canada, Panama, Colombia, the Caribbean, much of Brazil, and parts of Argentina. These are either major resource producers today, world powers themselves, or geopolitically strategic reasons. From a roleplay point of view, I think it's interesting for an empire to rule over parts of countries and deter revolt by the threat of its hydra-like stature. Revolutionaries do still test whether I'll sail across the international dateline, but a combination of benign neglect and making good on that hypothesis keeps them at bay. Foreign powers also are shell-shocked by my diplomatic hard power and the sheer weight that comes with 2,697 development. How did I pull off this late-game conquest? With colonization done, I conquered a few tags in Mozambique and used Ototsk as the backdoor to Asia. Asia had low tech due to institution distance, and China was inward regarding the later institutions for spawning them. I fought the horde known as Udige or Orochoni, with them still having a step advantage, but mercenaries, some token help from my colonies, and my own force limit militarily and narrowly overcame them. I had made a border reach in Ilan Hala to the Shun dynasty, as stated, and then I allied Wu. Shun was massive at the time, but I made my transports race through the East China Sea and dock in southern China to join my troops together with Wu. Together we made decisive victories over Shun and eventually captured Beijing. China had a wall of forts with zone of control, so you either had to seize high-level forts or travel around the western periphery of China. A major issue should they occupy your lands or kill allies because you're all the way in Tibet. In the peace deal, they lost a major portion of land in the Yellow Sea area, and in between wars, I invaded a very primitive tech Japan. I took half of Japan and left the south independent. During these Asian foreign adventures, I even got an event for a claim on Hawaii, but other things went awry and I reloaded. Next war was Shun, and I added Dali to my alliance. The running theme later in the game is getting others to fight part or all of my wars for no benefit to them. Shun was further demediated, and the independent part of Mongolia and Manchuria was now shared by multiple states, Shun being but one of many. Next was Yarkand. I did not have the DLC, which allows you to claim strategic interest lands, and I had won a border in the Second Shun War with the Yarkand province of Hohot. My ally, Dali, shared a long border with Yarkand, and Yarkand was a long thin strip from east to west, but with an outgrowth north in the Tian Shan mountain range, and a core kingdom in Baltistan. There, Baltistan roughly touched the Hindu Kush, Pakistan, northern India, Tajikistan, and Nepal. What happened was that I could declare on Yarkand, would take a few nearby provinces, but then Dali occupied provinces west of those provinces, thus blocking any westward coring, annexing in a peace deal or expansion in that war, or altogether in future wars. This meant I could get very little from this war no matter the war score or occupied provinces. 2 to 3 resets later, my troops were positioned like Olympic sprinters to quickly occupy land before Dali, and then fan across China's Wild West to hit 60% war score. Not so much fighting, but a lot of literal kleptocracy. We took so much that Yarkand nor her allies could make a difference by occupying barren permafrost in Siberia. I signed a peace deal before they could do real damage, making an obnoxious purple mosquito stinger in Asia. The West was a different stage and cast, but the same tragedy in 3 parts for my foes. Sick of policing my own subjects, my armies were elsewhere, and I got Great Britain to defend against Brandenburg. It didn't work a second time, so I stepped up my diplo game and allied Italy and the Commonwealth of Poland-Lithuania. Prussian blood boiling like AC/DC, it was no longer their cup of tea to face perhaps 3,000 of the anti-HRE European lynch mob. Wielded correctly, this new triumvirate of Theodoro, Ferrara, and the Sarmatian nobles of Poland-Lithuania could reclaim the Roman East. I started the wars, my allies wade through gore, and I get the cores. No objections raised by Poland, but Ferrara sometimes needed to be goaded and prodded a little bit more. First, we reclaimed Greece and the Ionian coast of Turkey. The previous war by luck got me Constantinople herself, with no effort on my part. In the same way, I noped out of Poland's war in the Pontic Steppe, taking some former Crimean Khanate lands, Kaffa and Matrega. When wars would start in the West, I let German princes occupy my provinces and build up my war exhaustion. But allies came to liberate them anyway, so it didn't matter. Earlier in the game, this caused me bankruptcy by removing the production of the Burgundian provinces. Here, I let Poland sweep with the Ottoman Empire, occupy and siege down every fort. In the Second War, I made Ottoman bubbles in inland Anatolia, surrounded by my conquest, making it impossible for them to unite troops or govern. Once again, I was more merciful to leave some independent land to them, but these enclaves of Ottoman land were positional checkmates. Things got juicier when they went revolutionary, as I'd get massive prestige and stability for fighting wars against them that I was already going to do. By the end, I retook almost all the Roman East with some Cappadocian table scraps for the people's Padishah, that consul of concessions, and the bitter desert of Nabatea. The entire conquest took 3 steps. Next, I bordered the Kurdish Ardalan in Iraq and used them as a flashpoint for the Italian state of Ferrara to fight the co-belligerents of Transoxiana and Fars. Of course, Poland was involved. I was not involved except when it was time to collect the provinces. The armies linked up and we swept over Mesopotamia, Persia, and poured over the firmer Timurid subjects. Lots of occupying in a region from Deir Ezzar to Kabul, from Baluchistan to Kazakhstan. In 2 separate wars, we got Iraq, some of Persia's heartlands, and another purple strip all the way through Asia to Siberia. I wasn't generous with Poland's unflinching service, but they weren't hurting for land. They were sitting on the Caucasus, nearly making the Caspian Mare Elorum. With East and West Bridge, I concluded my wars by allying Andhra and India and stealing land from Vijayanagar, expanding my market share in Mongolia and Nepal. If I had more time, I could bait Poland into helping me take land from the Somalian power of Warsangali via the Warsangali power guaranteeing Fars. I could also try to bait the Chinese kingdoms to help me take Siam, aka Thailand, or Ava, which is in Burma. The long-term goal would be consolidating a corridor from my East African colonies to Canton, and eventually one state ruling Asia. What is fun about this playthrough is how I became too big to fail, directing my misfortune of corruption and making Commonwealth serfs shoulder the tax bill. By using corruption, to avoid revolts is not a real strategy to conquer the world, nor is making others do the fighting. I would have to reduce corruption for a century and slow down conquest to make my techs competitive. I stopped teching up in admin at Tech 18. I constantly used paper mana to core, so I couldn't get the Imperial CB, and I constantly used diplo to take land, and my military points lag because of the general cost. Every cost doubles 100 corruption, after all. I would also need to quell separatism throughout and cope without the buffer that corruption permitted. I hope this Theodoro guide was helpful and comprehensive for you. The DLC can open up many new paths and hazards in the course of the game, but the strategies described can work for any player, with any DLC combo or none at all. I'm not close to being the best player, but striving to win as the ultimate Doomer OPM has galvanized my meta. Figuring out consistent strategies is important for endangered polities, and they must leave only one event to chance early in the game if you're playing on Iron Man. If you pick a region, know what unique abilities you have for that tag, and know those are your foes. For example, Horde Shock, their combat and CCR ideas, the Tribal Conquest CB, and you would need diplomatic flattery or defensive alliances to deal with them. Austria, on the other hand, will often integrate Bohemian Hungary, and the HRE will be a feuding beehive. Native Americans should dumpster Iberian colonies as soon as they become colonial nations. Know who is strong and who is weak near you, and watch states to seize an opportunity. Judging military encounters, picking the right expansion strategy, managing the bottlenecks, and avoiding long-term strategic blunders. These things will help you master EU4. I would say that even if Gothic world conquest is out of reach for most, Theodoro is worth playing for an infuriating but delightfully chaotic campaign.